Is Miami becoming a true threat to land five-star edge rusher Colin Simmons? What about Dylan Stewart? Is Jason Taylor just trying to build a defensive end dynasty at the U?
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Alex Donno, your host, University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, and contributor to allhurricanes.com. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen each and every day. We are available free wherever you get your podcasts and available free on YouTube. So there's been a lot of Colin Simmons buzz, five-star top edge rusher from Duncanville, Texas. Been a lot of Miami buzz for him, saying all the right things after that official visit. Someone who's saying all the right things for different reasons here. Our recruiting overlord and expert, and also a colleague of mine at allhurricanes.com. So, Brian, coming out of Colin Simmons' OV last weekend at Miami, he talked about the Canes not leaving any unanswered questions for him, and he and his mom were really impressed by the very detailed 3-year plan that they laid out for his college career. How I think Miami's trending up for Colin Simmons, but how far up are they trending in your mind?
It depends on who you talk to. People around LSU and Texas still like their chances too. So I don't put a lot of stock in opinions from the individual schools. I learned this a long time ago. If you ask a coach, I'm getting that kid. So coaches don't like hearing no very much, and they don't accept it very well. So I've heard LSU and I've heard Texas and I've heard Miami. It sounds like to me a typical 5-star recruitment because it'll probably go down to the wire. But Miami did make a move because I don't think they were really in the top 2, if you will, before the visit. So I think it's pretty cool. And maybe the more important point, Alex, you know what? If you don't have a plan with these kids, kind of like the guys that are on your campus, you're not going to impress them or their parents. Having that 3-year, that was pretty cool when I heard about that. I don't know what you thought of it, but I was like, okay, they know this is a special player that probably doesn't want to play his senior year. He wants to go to the NFL. Let's lay it out for him. So I think that's a good sign because Miami has a really interesting way of doing recruiting that maybe some other schools do not.
With Colin Simmons, do we have any idea on the timeline? Could he, and obviously for any 5-star, the recruitment doesn't stop, but do we know if he might drop a verbal commitment this summer, or is he going to wait till the end to even announce anything?
I haven't specifically looked into it because of what you just said. I don't have as much interest in the commitment dates as I used to, putting it mildly, but I would imagine he will, because if nothing else, the kids just want the phone calls to stop. So my guess is July. It's just true. A lot of them will commit just to get guys like me to stop calling them. It's true. I mean, again, like you said, it doesn't matter. Mario Cristobal is still going to go after him. He may stop the media from contacting him somewhat, but he ain't going to stop the school. So I expect LSU, Miami, or Texas, whichever one you think will be the landing destination. But there's still other schools trying to get him too. So long way to go, Mr. Stewart.
You mean Simmons?
Simmons. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. And because I did, and you know what? It's a good segue because I wanted to talk about Dylan Stewart, who also, he was visiting Miami this past weekend as well. It wasn't just Colin Simmons. They had another 5-star edge on campus. And I was watching the Steve Wiltfong whip around from last night. And, he did mention Miami is trending heavy for Dylan Stewart. So on Dylan Stewart, Brian, do you think Miami is trending heavily for him? And do you think they have a better chance with Stewart than they do with Colin Simmons?
Yes, I do. I do. I just, historically, it's really hard to get kids out of the Dallas area that are true 5-star guys to kind of leave that footprint. Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, that area is where they usually go. There are exceptions. A kid could go to Michigan or Miami or Southern Cal, whatever, but it's hard. The DC area has been tremendous talent-wise for decades. And this young man is a great example of that. But Stewart, I don't think is locked into like the Big Ten, Penn State kind of deal as he once was. The vibe is pretty good with Miami. It's different than the Big Ten schools. The weather is different. Obviously, the lifestyle is different. And if Wiltfong said that it's going in the right direction, there's probably reason for it beyond what I've heard. I haven't heard near as much as he probably has because he's keeping it pretty tight-lipped. It's typical of 5-star kids. But Miami, if they can get past the next week or so and he doesn't commit to another school, then I like their chances a lot more. We're at that point where kids could pop at any time and there's not going to be any rhyme or reason. So you just got to keep hitting refresh like I do all day on the internet. But Miami is went after him really hard. They know they need more pass rushers to get to the level they need. And here's the other thing. If you get him, you're also keeping him away from one of the guys that you're probably going to end up playing somewhere down the road.
That's true. Let's go to the offensive side of the football because 4-star tight end Elijah Lofton out of Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas. I have dropped a Donno ball for this player to Miami. And I will note, I beat Steve Wiltfong's crystal ball by about 24 hours on that because he has crystal balled Elijah Lofton to Miami. A lot of other recruiting analysts have. There's strong momentum there. And so, Brian, obviously he comes from a mega high school program at Bishop Gorman. Miami has Brevin Jordan was from Bishop Gorman, and Lofton gets a lot of player comps to Brevin Jordan. But the thing that stood out to me watching Elijah Lofton's film is this young man loves to block. Like he really enjoys driving people into the turf in addition to catching passes. How do you feel about Lofton as a prospect, especially since despite him being a 4-star, a lot of Hurricanes fans see his dimensions where he's not one of these 6'6" guys. He's listed at 6'2", about 215. So a lot of people say that and they're like, wait, he's only 6'2" at tight end.
Well, this is one of those deals where it's about fit. And I'm glad you brought it up. When Cristobal and his staff were at Oregon, they used a lot of H-backs, a lot of different kinds of tight ends. It is a position that helps save your roster a roster spot because he's essentially a fullback, a tight end, a move guy, and you got to have at least one of them for what the offense is going to be. So if you're going to run power football, you need a lot of tight ends. You need versatility. So he could split out. He could be in the slot, help you on screen game, etc. And to put it in perspective too, his other visit coming up is the one that most people are curious about. It's Texas. Texas doesn't just randomly recruit kids from Las Vegas. He's really good. So he's going to catch passes just as much as he's going to block. But again, this is about versatility. Having a guy that basically does 2 jobs for you, 1 scholarship.
Yeah. So when we come back, we're joined here by Brian Smith, recruiting expert here on the Locked On Network and a colleague of mine at All Hurricanes. I have to wonder if the player we're about to talk about could be the first 5-star to commit to the Miami Hurricanes this cycle, because the Canes have a big one. Literally and figuratively, they have a big one visiting this weekend. We will talk about him and more. Keep it locked right here to Locked On Canes. I know you're keeping it locked to FanDuel. Make your way to FanDuel because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. I know the NBA Finals are over, but the Stanley Cup Finals are not, and there's a ton of baseball and a ton of soccer happening this summer, and obviously UFC fights happening all over the place. So there is action on all corners being had at FanDuel right now. They have great promotions every day. It's a safe and secure app, and you can get paid instantly. There is no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That means you have nothing to lose on that first bet. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen today. We are available free wherever you get your podcasts and available free on YouTube. And for the everydayers, you can take your everydayer experience to the next level by subscribing to our exclusive subtext SMS texting service. Get text to your phone directly from mine with show previews and updates, breaking news, recruiting notes, one-on-ones. You can ask me questions. If you want to subscribe, you can get the first 14 days free. And then if you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. I'm including a link in the show description below to join our subtext community. We've gotten some new members this past week, so welcome aboard to everyone who's on there now. We are talking recruiting with Brian Smith at FBScout_Florida. If you want to follow him on Twitter, loads of information. So, Brian, the recruiting experts have a lot of confidence in Justin Scott to Miami, the 5-star defensive tackle. He's got crystal balls in Miami's direction. And Justin, he's visiting this weekend. Could this end up being the first 5-star Miami lands this cycle?
I think that would be the odds-on favorite. There's been a lot of heat with him coming towards the Canes for a long time. You and I have discussed it on air and off air, and this is his chance to finalize it, if you will. And with 5 stars, it's always hard to project, but what I was told from a source from another school is they thought he would pick Miami this summer, but still take visits.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what exactly that means. I was told Notre Dame wants to get him on campus in the fall. They didn't care about this summer. They're the only one out of the major schools recruiting him that didn't try to line up a visit. They're waiting for the fall. So that's an asterisk. Ohio State and Michigan, Michigan, he just went to.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I have had different people tell me who they thought number 1, 2, or 3 were in the last 2 weeks. So Miami's the most consensus pick for him, and a lot of people still think it'll be this summer, but his recruitment probably won't be over.
Is he one of these program changing type players that you and I talk about so much on this show?
Yes, because he can be a powerful defensive end at over 300 pounds. Cool. That's just as rare as it gets. So, yeah, he can do things that you can't teach. His lateral mobility, his ability to sidestep an offensive lineman and shoot a gap at 310. You just don't talk about those kinds of things. And he can play nose guard or one tech if you want him to as well, D tackle. And when you can move guys like that around, boy, it's hard for an offensive coordinator playing against him. So, yeah, he's a game changer. He would be in the rotation regardless of where he goes freshman year.
Now, you mentioned in covering recruiting, and Brian he's in the weeds. Covering recruiting is his life, right? You talk about the verbal commitment. It doesn't mean, as much as it used to, right? Because even when, a blue chipper verbally commits somewhere, the recruiting doesn't stop. And we're seeing that playing out with one of Miami's verbal commits, 4-star wide receiver Chance Robinson. So Chance, early in June, made an official visit to Penn State. He just made an OV to Florida. He's been committed to Miami for the past 2 months verbally, but he's taken other visits. He dropped what appeared to be a top 3 between Miami, Florida, and Penn State. And there's a lot of positive buzz coming off of his Florida visit, Brian. So how concerned should Miami fans be here?
Knowing Chance, I've told people this several times. I don't really care about the Florida visit so much. It's too similar to Miami, but he grew up a Miami fan. His dad's a Miami fan. The only school I'm worried about is Penn State. If he goes to Florida, I will be flat out shocked. Their quarterback room is terrible, and they're not a program I expect to do very well this season. I'm being kind.
But here would be the X factor, though, when you talk about the quarterback room, because they've got DJ Lagway verbally committed. They do. So it's like, so is that a fit? But then, and what's the buzz on, not to make this Locked On Gators, because Brandon does a good enough job with that, but I know that there may be some concern about Lagway taking a visit to Clemson. So it seems like a lot of their recruits are riding on DJ Lagway.
Well, I mean, he's a tremendous prospect. If you want to watch some interesting film, go plug in that. But do you really want to attach your wagon to a kid that hasn't even enrolled yet?
Right.
At the end of the day, I don't see that. I mean, at least Emory Williams, Jakari Brown, they're on campus and they have some promise. I don't see anybody on Florida's campus that I would be excited about. You know what I mean? I just don't. Penn State has Drew Aller, who is a freaky athlete at quarterback. If he's intrigued by that, he's normal. And it's Penn State's completely different. It's, Aller's going to end up in the NFL. Florida does not have a current quarterback going to end up in the NFL. So, again, maybe he just likes Florida staff or whatever, and they've done a good job recruiting him, but I can't see that one. I really can't.
We're joined here by recruiting expert Brian Smith. Brian, I want to talk about a transfer possibility for Miami. I don't really know if Miami even has a roster spot left at this point, but there's always a way to manipulate that and figure that out. But a player Miami did recruit in the last cycle, defensive lineman Derrick LeBlanc. He's out of your stomping grounds in Central Florida. I know you've watched him play in person before. He was with Oklahoma just from the 2023 class, but he's already hit the portal. I think family reasons he wants to change locations there. Do you think Miami should pursue LeBlanc, and how much of a chance could they have? Because I don't think he took an official visit to Miami last cycle. I think it was Florida and Penn State who got his other visits outside of Oklahoma. So where do you think things could stand there?
That is a very unique scenario. You can read through the tweet. It's not completely cryptic. There's something going on with his family. So it's going to be inside the state of Florida.
Yeah.
Miami, UCF, USF, or Florida. That's kind of how I read. I guess Florida State could be, but I don't think they were a major factor in his recruitment. So does Miami need defensive linemen? Yes. Does he qualify in his circumstance to be eligible right away? That's the only thing I wonder about, because he didn't enter in May when they were talking about all the portal. They changed the rules on when you can enter and all that. I don't know if he can get an exemption. That will change a little bit of his recruitment, because a lot of schools won't want him unless he's eligible right away.
Right.
But if you're leaving like for a family member that's sick or something, I would assume the NCAA would have the common sense. Well, saying NCAA and common sense is not a good thing very often. It's a terrible organization, but it's just true. But he's 6'5", 275 or whatever. He's a defensive lineman that has some pass rush moves. He was heavily recruited. He had offers when he was a freshman in high school. So I would assume Miami's going to at least kick the tires on it. There's just some delegation on how that's going to work from the NCAA's part. Again, he didn't enter at a normal time. So who do they put that on? Because whoever makes that stamp decision is going to change where he ends up, quite frankly. If I was Miami, though, I would at least inquire. Yeah. It's free to inquire. So,
right.
Yeah, I mean, the Hurricanes need size and they need defensive linemen, and they only got one D tackle in the last class. Yeah, you should definitely look at LeBlanc. And for the record, he was at Osceola High School in Kissimmee, just south of Orlando. That program's always got ball players. So, yeah, it's interesting, because when I saw that come across my screen, I'm like, oh.
I was shocked by that. I mean, he literally just got there, hasn't played a game at Oklahoma. So, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So when we come back, I want to talk about one of Miami's top wide receiver targets who just visited, how things are trending with Braylon Staley. And I got to ask a question to Brian about recruiting timelines, because, we've got some folks who are, miserable human beings. And I wonder if some of these people are even Miami fans. They're complaining about the lack of verbal commitments that Miami has gotten out of the visits last weekend. So we got to get to that and more with Brian Smith. You want to keep it locked right here to Locked On Canes. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen today. We are available free wherever you get your podcasts, and available free on YouTube. And for the everydayers, today's a 2-for-1 happy hour on Locked On Canes, because we're going to have an episode later today with Sports Hall of Famer and former NFL standout Leon Searcy. Leon Searcy and the truth teller Bruce Warner are going to join me later on today. Tomorrow, on Wednesday, we got Malik Rozier on the show. So this is one of the greatest weeks ever of Locked On Canes. And it's always a great morning and a great day when Brian Smith is with us. So Brian, Miami, we talked about one receiver who's already committed to taking other visits. Miami just had another 4-star receiver on campus, Braylon Staley. He and his family seem to really enjoy the Miami visit. I've been told over the past several days that it looks like a Tennessee versus Miami battle for the Aiken, South Carolina native. I know Clemson was very much in it, but they've taken so many blue chip wide receivers that, they probably aren't the spot for him anymore. What can you tell me about Staley and where Miami might be trending for him?
I heard the same things that you did, that the visit went well. And even before the visit, I know that Miami really wanted him. This wasn't like we're a feeling out process. The Canes want Staley on their roster. He could be a slot. He could be an outside guy. He has the speed to take it over the top. And he's a 50-50 ball guy too. He's an all-around receiver. I think he could play early. In terms of like playing style, I would compare him to like a Reggie Wayne in terms of style. He's very smooth.
Yeah.
I mean, Reggie, obviously, I'm not saying he's Reggie Wayne. He's one of the greatest players of all time at any position, but he's in that body size and style where Reggie, just everything he did was very fluid. Staley's similar to that. And he's a competitive kid. So I've heard the same, Tennessee, and he's going to visit the Vols here coming up. And then after that, he technically has a visit with North Carolina on the weekend of the 23rd. I don't think that's going to be much of an option. I agree that it's Tennessee or Miami, and more than likely this probably gets done pretty soon, because he's got them back to back. It's only a couple of weeks apart on the visits. Miami has playing time available at wide receiver. They need receivers, so there's a lot to sell, and Shannon Dawson's offense is pretty attractive. I like Miami's chances here.
Nice. Now, Miami just had maybe their biggest weekend of official visits, if not ever, probably in decades, with 4 top 10 players in the country on campus, so many 5 and 4 stars. I've seen some people making comments like this, and we got a comment on our YouTube channel yesterday from someone who's like, how can you not call that weekend a failure for Miami when you had all these top recruits on campus? And in his words, you've only gotten a commitment from a linebacker nobody's heard of, he said, which is pretty disrespectful to Cameron Pruitt, by the way, and a transfer linebacker from Louisville, who, by the way, didn't even visit last weekend, so that wasn't even one of the guys who visited. But it's like, Brian, with these timelines, we've had this conversation before. When you're talking about early June visits, you don't usually expect the 5-star guys to commit and shut things down right after the visit. So, I mean, it's pretty ridiculous to call last weekend a failure, right?
This is the same thing that Alabama goes through, that Georgia goes through, that Notre Dame goes through, that Texas goes through. These kids are going to take 3 or 4 visits. You know why? Because they can. Elite players can wait as long as they want. And it doesn't matter how much away from them in their office, they can cuss and scream all they want. Coaches don't like it. Coaches, believe me, they do. They have zero control over it. They have none. The players, the elite players, can do whatever they want. And Miami's going after the elite. So get used to it, Buckaroo, because that's not going to change very much. It's never going to change. And this is probably going to be a situation where most of these kids drag it out to late summer or all the way to signing day. Happens every year. Last year, Miami got something like 9 commitments or something like that between like June 20th and like the 10th of July. It's just, they've taken their visits now. They start making decisions. Maui Goa, etc. They got a ton of those guys. Jaden Wayne. We're about to have that. After this next weekend, you and I will be talking about so-and-so committed to Miami or so-and-so committed to another school. Do you think Miami will still recruit him? That's what the conversations are going to switch to. Once you get to about the 20th, everything changes. So I'm interested to see which guys pop. Some of them will be unexpected. Some of them will not be. But at the end of the day, they're going to take their visits and take their time. Yes. And no, it's not bad that they didn't get commitments. That's ridiculous.
It's a failure of a weekend, he said.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Whoever that is an idiot. So,
oh man, I appreciate your time as always. Brian Smith, not an idiot. That's the best endorsement I can give for him. And he works so hard, not only on this network, providing recruiting insight for all the college channels, but he works hard at allhurricanes.com. Anything that you're working on the site this week, Brian? Because I know you're always hitting people up with recruiting info from every angle.
Well, I've got an interview that I just put up with Judd Anderson this morning.
My guy.
Yeah, he's a great kid, man. He really is. Chris Ewald, kid, they're still recruiting despite him being committed to Michigan. I'm interviewing him later today. And I'm going to do a little segue into some of the current roster, talking about some of the top players for this next season. I'm going to do a bunch of their profiles because this is a unique year for Mario Cristobal and his program, changing the culture. And I think some of the guys they brought in from the portal is going to be kind of my theme. I think Matt Lee might be the most important player on the entire Miami roster for this next season. So we're going to see a really unique team, and I'm kind of anxious to dig into this stuff. We're not that far away. It's only about 100 days from the season starting. So yeah, it's time to start talking about Miami Hurricanes football 2023.
Make sure you guys follow Brian on Twitter at FBScout_Florida. And we will talk to you again not long from now, later today with Leon Searcy. Keep it locked right here to Locked On Canes. We'll talk to you next time right here on the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.